Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Philosophy Bros podcast. Today we will be discussing several topics. First one will be praise and blame, and also free will. But also, we want to discuss the role of ethics in general in philosophy. And to start us off, I think we want to go around the table and just start off with free will, state what we think about it, and we'll continue from there. So to start us off, how about Will go first?
Okay, I think the compatibilist position makes the most sense. Basically, I think a lot of people think that if their actions are determined, they can't have free will because there'll be some external thing imposing themselves on,
Right.
Or it's just there'll be physical processes going on in their body and their brain that kind of determine what's happening.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of mistaken, is where they are those physical processes and the brain.
Right.
So it's them. That's what they are. So it's them making the decision, even if something beforehand might have influenced them. So long as they're the one making the decisions based on those influences, I don't think that's a problem.
Okay.
I also think that it's kind of more as long as if the decisions they're making, if there was some other possible person that you could put in their place and that other person would have made a different decision, then I think that they have free will in that situation.
Gotcha. What about you, Nicholas?
Well, I tend to agree with Will that, Will kind of discussed a lot of topics and I'll touch upon a few. He says that moral responsibility depends somewhat on the possibility of us having free will, because maybe if we put a different person in our place and that person can do a different action than the one we did, then that would mean we do have free will and we can hold people responsible. I also tend to agree that compatibilism is true.
Mm-hmm.
Compatibilism is the philosophical view that causal determinism and free will are compatible, and this is a stark contrast with the belief people usually hold, and they say that these two are incompatible.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to agree with compatibilism. I would also like to present my personal view of free will. I think free will is necessary for other things that we do in our day-to-day lives,
Yeah.
including moral action, but it also extends to love and caring relationships. It seems that free will is necessary for that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about later after we get through all of our talk about free will at a more kind of lower level.
Yeah.
So so the other position he's going to talk about, the one that general people have, is free will libertarianism.
Yeah.
Which is two beliefs: one, free will exists, and two, free will is incompatible with causal determinism.
Right.
This is generally the view most people hold. They kind of say that, now we've seen that causal determinism is not true because quantum mechanics, some things are random, but that kind of seems doesn't really seem like that makes much sense, because if your actions are just random, then they're not free. That's just random chance. I think that's even worse
Interesting.
than determinism.
Interesting. So let me give mine real quick, and then we'll go to Nicholas, who raised his hand. My view on this free will determinism debate is that even though, despite whatever physical reality there is, whether or not things are determined, there's a causal chain of events, or whether or not we do have free will, I think that we have no option to be free. That's at least how we experience it as. So it's not really a commitment to either, although if you were to press me, I would probably side with determinism. But despite that, I think we act and function as if we are free will agents, mistaken as it could be.
All right, then the other position that kind of gets brought up is hard determinism. Hard determinism is the position that casual determinism and free will are incompatible, and that free will does not exist.
Yeah.
Um,
But what did you want to say, Nicholas?
Yes, so it seems like we're diving deeper and deeper into what causality is
Mm-hmm.
and whether determinism is true or not.
Right.
I don't know if you guys would see it relevant to discuss David Hume's understanding of causality.
No,
oh,
I'd
go
love to hear it.
ahead.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so David Hume says that in the world we establish for ourselves and our own understanding of the world causal relationships, like I poke a ball and then the ball moves. However, Hume says that there is no real justification to believe that causality exists.
Mm.
He says that we're just observing conjunctions of different things
Oh yeah.
and they happen together over and over again. And we believe there is causality, but he says that there is no justification to actually know or assert causality exists in the world.
Mm. Yeah. That kind of sounds very similar to like his idea of personal identity, which is like a bundle of perceptions, and it's like it's like a rejection of like there being a united self, but instead we, like, when we look back on our life, the thing that it's the appearance of identity is the perception of unity, and when it's just like a conglomeration of
So I guess that might also be another position as to why we might not have free will. Is just that who are we saying has free will in the first place? If we're just like a, kind of a bundle of different things. If there's no like self behind the actions,
yeah.
then like there can't be anyone responsible for it because there isn't a person in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know somebody. I know somebody who has a very unique idea of like determinism. They call it soft determinism, but it's where, oh boy, okay. Let me just put it kind of succinctly. It's like a multiversal theory of like there's lots of our realities, like an infinite number of us. So on like each of these pathways, the causal chain of causality is true. It's just like there's a law, so any possibility
Talking about multiverse.
right out there exists. So it's not exactly free will, but it's like kind of a soft determinism. But
Though one thing I think Buddhism kind of talks about how like a bundle of self-view could kind of be somewhat compatible with being responsible for things, because like they have like the karma involved, which is kind of I'm not exactly sure how well they argue for that, but like they have a view that there's no self, but also that like there's actual like consequences for your actions, and somewhat that like you're morally responsible, which
Right.
I'm not. So that would be like a view where there's no self, but there's still like some sort of responsibility for actions.
yeah, I mean, you guys said a different action. So when it comes to compatibilism, if there's somebody who can do a different action than the one that you might do, that's help me so that I don't get this wrong, but that might prove that there's like some degree of free will involved in that.
Yes, so I believe that what I was trying to say there is that maybe there is an argument for moral responsibility to hold other people accountable, because
see.
maybe you do action A,
Yeah,
but if another person is in my position,
yeah,
they do an action different from action A.
right.
So we could apply that to replacing people in other people's positions, or we could just interpret that at the individual level. We can say a person, without reference to any other people, can always do otherwise. And that
Interesting.
substantiates free will and moral responsibility.
Yeah, it's just like
Okay, are you? I'm not exactly sure what you're saying, because like if it's just one person, then they can't do otherwise. If the casual determinism is true, you have to reject that someone could do otherwise if casual determinism is true.
Exactly. So maybe freedom of will is not the ability to do otherwise.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's
Yes.
what I was kind of saying. I think it's more just like there's a possible person that could that if they were in that place, they would do otherwise. Then you have free will in that situation. There are situations where you don't have free will, such as like when you're
restrained.
Yeah, when you're restrained, you regardless of the person in the situation, that they couldn't do anything about that.
Yeah, it's just if somebody, it kind of reminds me of. I'll tell you how in just a second, but it reminds me of evolution in that different species come into contact with a certain environment, and so they react or they develop differently along their lines of species. But it's like if people are in the same situation, then if there's the potential that they respond differently, that's the existence of free will, or at least some degree to it. But to me, it would be like, this would speak of people reacting in different ways according to their situation. So I think like determinism, like that wouldn't be evidence for free will, because these people, they react according to their situation, but that is still like along a line of causal events.
Hey, Nicholas, do you want to bring up Smart's paper? What is Smart's position?
Yes, we could do that. Even though I believe Smart's position is more related to praise and blame, which is a topic we're also going to discuss.
Well, yeah, but I think he was a hard determinist.
I think so too. Let's see. Smart's position is that the freedom of will philosophical view, to believe that, he says it's a metaphysically confused view.
Yeah.
So is he talking about free will libertarianism or compatibilism? Does he reject both of those? Or
I think
because it seems like he would have to be rejecting both of them for his position.
Well, probably. I think he just rejects both of them.
How does he reject both of them?
I think he just thinks they're silly, and he works off from that idea.
Not necessarily.
No.
Smart tries to make a distinction first between chance or accident and pure chance. And he's going to describe that in his own terms, whether it's logically possible that we have free will if the world is a chance world or if it's a pure chance world. But he then is going to go on and say that there are only two possibilities if we accept the view of free will. There is the possibility that events happen as a result of unbroken causal chains.
Yeah.
There is a continuity that's never broken. Or maybe there is pure chance. And his argument hinges on the reason that, first, we only have these two options if we accept free will. And second, that free will is not possible in either of those.
So what are those options?
Yeah, the world is causally determined. It's a continuity that's never broken. Or the events in the world happen by pure chance.
All right. Does he say anything about the casual determinism possibility and what the problem with that one is?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about randomness, though. It's like, remember when Caleb had us, like, raise our hands, and I was like, I relied upon, like, randomness, right? But even then, that wouldn't lend itself to free will, because, free will means that there's some sort of agent which is able to, like, make a pure choice, like, direct the course of events purely through will, right? Or something like that. But randomness doesn't even help that at all. It would mean that it's beyond their control to make a free will choice.
Yeah. Okay, so what did he say about the casual determinism?
So he says that causal determinism, either it applies to the universe itself, the universe is such that it is causally determined, or causal determinism applies to theories. The theories establish some way in which the world is or should be, but we don't necessarily know if that's the case. So he says that if the universe is like that, and we're formulating a theory about how the universe is causally determined, there is no sense in that endeavor. And if the universe is about pure chance, then causal determinism doesn't apply to everything.
Interesting. For Smart, does he side with, like, hard determinism? I don't know, he jumps from some sort of determinism to his idea of praise and blame. It's like, people can't be, since they aren't really responsible for their actions, since determinism, praise and blame kind of acts like as more of a corrective rod to, push people in a certain direction more than, it doesn't carry the idea that people are morally responsible for their actions. And so praise and blame becomes, I told you guys already, but sort of like a cattle prod more than anything toward what he thinks is good, which is a utilitarian framework. And I think for that, if you go down that path, ethics becomes like very pragmatic. It's like, we can't really know what things are metaphysically, and so we have to basically like take a shortcut in order to establish some sort of line of what to do, and it becomes a matter of pragmatism, and that really lends itself to utilitarianism.
I remember Smart, and maybe it was Smart or some other author, they said that independently of whether free will exists or not, we should still praise and blame based on utilitarianism. Because it's not about the action that people do, but about the consequences of blaming people. That's the value.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Do you think, what goes better, free will and utilitarianism, or determinism and, or did I say that backwards? No, I didn't. Determinism and utilitarianism. So, if the end goal is utility, to promote the greatest happiness, pleasure, and pain, does one serve those purposes better than the other?
What do you think? I think I have an answer, but I need to think a little more about it.
I think that determinism would work much better for that. Or I think determinism would work really well with it, because if it's... that's actually a good question. I don't know. It's like if determinism would work really well with utilitarianism, because then you could, the actions that made somebody do a thing is only a result of previous events that occurred in their life. And so it takes the burden off from the person who did the deed, and it pushes it onto their surroundings. And so when you can control the surroundings, I don't know, it seems like determinism and utilitarianism is able to spread out across more area than does free will and utilitarianism. Because if it was free will and utilitarianism, then I think you can't, it would be harder to control the environments or the circumstances that make a person, because the circumstances and the person are kind of separate because of free will. The person with free will can act independently of their circumstances if they have free will.
Okay, let's talk about praise and blame a bit, how free will relates to it a bit more. So I think the more obvious thing is that if free will exists, then we can praise and blame people.
Yeah.
People are morally responsible for their actions.
Real quick, Will, we're kind of on that tangent, but what do you think of kind of my line of thinking? Do you think free will and utilitarianism would work better, or determinism and utilitarianism?
I think hard determinism and utilitarianism kind of works best.
Yeah.
If people are morally responsible for things in a way that we can praise and blame them, if we're obligated to praise and blame people,
right?
Then which free will kind of supposes.
Yeah.
Then that's a problem for utilitarianism, because utilitarianism will often want us to sometimes blame people who are innocent if it will quiet a mob, or stuff like that,
yeah.
Which that's obviously bad. If we that would be bad if we're only supposed to blame people when they are responsible for the action.
Yeah, well, I was just telling Nicholas here, it's if there's free will, then a person can act independently of the circumstances that made them, right? Because
No, that would be if free will libertarianism is true.
Right. Yeah.
If we're going with compatibilism, they can't act against how the circumstances led them to be.
Right, but if somebody, that's what I'm saying. It's like if free will and utilitarianism, if somebody were to take those as like a framework, then like a person with free will can act independently of the circumstances that made them. They can act because there's no like causal chain of events.
If it's free will
Right.
libertarianism,
Right.
Not compatibilism doesn't entail that.
Right. Versus with like hard determinism, and a utilitarian would be able to like point to the circumstances around a person and say, well, that person really couldn't act independently of their events. And so the events or the circumstances that made up a person, well, yielded the choices of that person. So I think determinism would work much better. But I was curious about what Nicholas had to say about whether or not free will or determinism yields itself better to utilitarianism. Lots of isms.
When we're saying that determinism and utilitarianism would work best, I am finding many different ways to interpret that.
Okay.
Are we saying that the conjunction fits well? Are we saying that one best explains the other? But in any way in which we interpret it, there is a significant difference as to what normative theories we apply, depending on our metaphysical commitments.
That's right.
Because if we are committed to causal determinism and incompatibilism, then it seems that utilitarianism would be pretty much the only normative theory that would justify praise and blame. However, if we are more on the libertarian compatibilist commitment, then we can still apply utilitarian praise and blame. We can say, look, we are blaming this person not necessarily because they did something morally wrong, but because there is utility in blaming the person.
Right.
But in this latter situation in which we have free will, we don't exclusively apply utilitarian judgments. We apply utilitarianism, deontological theories, virtue ethics, care ethics. I think that free will would allow for a plurality of normative theories and moral judgments.
Interesting.
While hard determinism blocks many of the values we assign to other theories.
So deontology specifically, I think, would have a problem with hard determinism because deontology is like actions only have moral worth if they're done out of like a good will.
Right.
And like that doesn't really seem like actually, does goodwill require that we're free?
I think so. I think so.
I guess it's more of a semantic discussion because there is free will, there is goodwill. Nietzsche talks about the will to power.
Right.
So is will always free will, or do we have wills that are not free wills?
It's funny that you should mention that. It's because before you got here, Will and I were talking a lot about Nietzsche, and as far as like will is concerned, like what's the here? Can you pull it up real quick of what he had to say exactly on that? But
the cause sui, cause of itself, is the best self-contradiction that has ever been conceived, a type of logical rape and abomination. But humanity's excessive pride has got itself profoundly and horribly entangled with precisely this piece of nonsense. The longing for freedom of will in the superlative metaphysical sense, which unfortunately still rules in the heads of the half-educated, the longing to bear the entire and ultimate responsibility for your actions, yourself, and to relieve God, world, ancestors, chance, and society of the burden. All this means nothing less than being that very cause sui, and with a greater than Munchausen's pulling yourself by the hair from the swamp of nothingness up into existence.
Yeah, so he's not really a fan. But the thing is, like, as a part of his entire schematic, it's like...
Well, that seems to be against free will libertarianism mostly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just the thing is like in his entire world, it's will versus will. In his entire schematic, like it's will versus will, and so he's not a huge fan of it. Like you can still have, like,
so
a will,
he
but-
also kind of like also with Buddhism and Hume, he also kind of rejects that there's like this unified person.
Yeah.
Rather, there's just like kind of a bunch of different drives and stuff that are each vying for
Yeah.
dominance. So to say that there's no person for which free will can apply to.
which is interesting because like for Kant, for Kant, like he would be totally against Nietzsche's framework, is because it's not supposed to be instinctual. Reason is like opposed to instinct for Kant, and the thing that makes a person able to like enter into the categorical imperative is their ability to be reasonable and act according to reason, which is the assumption. Well, I guess I don't know. Maybe that would be a dominant drive, but
So yeah, I guess that's one position that would be against both compatibilism and free will libertarianism would be the bundle view of self, because under that kind of position there isn't really, or just like where there isn't really any sort of unified self, that it doesn't really make sense to say that there's any sort of free will under that.
Yeah.
Except possibly if you go with Buddhism, where there's like still moral responsibility. The other ones, some other positions against like compatibilism would be something like, say like someone was brainwashed, so they were brainwashed into believing something. So what would be example? I guess like they could say they were brainwashed to go rob a bank, and then after we say, did they have a choice to rob the bank? Like, was that actually, that would be one position. And then, like, if compatibilism is true, we say, well, yeah, the brainwashed person was free when they did that. So, you'd either have to, you'd have to reject that somehow. So that's one position. Should we start relating praise and blame to moral theories, or kind of how
yeah, I mean,
we're already doing that a bit. So yeah, utilitarianism works really well with hard determinism, because then there isn't really any sort of thing as moral responsibility, and we can just blame people or praise them when it influences behavior to make utility more likely.
I thought Nicholas's point on like a plurality of theories is open with the possibility of free will versus hard determinism, which, as far as I can think, for the only ethical theories we've had that we've talked about, is the only one that's compatible. So I thought that was an interesting point. But let's see here.
Well, yeah, it kind of seemed like with Kantian or deontology, it was important that you were responsible for your actions, and the moral worth comes in you having a good will, using reason to go forward with the actions. And so I guess that one kind of requires that you're responsible for those actions. If it has nothing to do with you, then, then like you aren't responsible, and thus the actions are morally worthless. And so if free will doesn't exist, then every action would be morally worthless, which that won't really work for deontology.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it.
What about virtue ethics?
Well, I think we're speeding a little with these theories. So we have talked a bit about utilitarianism. And will you say that according to Kant, people would be morally responsible if they have free will, because they are acting according to these universal moral laws and this principle of reason that all human beings are endowed to, or at least in kind, in the type of beings we're endowed to. However, I think that another important consideration for Kantianism and for deontological theories in general would be the relationships we have with other people. Because when we praise and blame, there is always a person that is doing the praise and blame and a person that is receiving it. So, what do you guys think about the role of relationships in praising and blaming, whether it's Kantianism or some other theory?
Well, praise and blame, as far as it applies to like deontology, I mean, I definitely think that it does include a lot of free will. Praise and blame for relationships specifically, like friendships or like romantic, or what specifically do you mean?
The examples Kant discussed would be mainly friendship and romantic relationships.
Yeah. I guess I would need a refresher on that one.
Let's see. There is an article about someone who's not Kant, but that author is a Kantian.
Right.
Christine Korsgaard. I couldn't remember the last name for the life of me. Do you want to check it out?
Yeah, no, I'd love to.
Okay, while he's reading that, let's talk about virtue ethics again.
Yes.
This is one that works with, so this was Ethics Without Free Will by, let's see.
Smart?
No. Here it is. Michael Sloat.
Oh, yeah.
So he brought up Spinoza as a possible virtue ethics that would be compatible with hard determinism. Nicholas, do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember a bit of it. So, according to Spinoza's view of virtue, or at least how the author is interpreting it, we could have virtue in a completely causally determined world. Because it's not about whether we can choose differently. It's about, look, people are choosing to do, well, not choosing, we observe people do these actions, and we can just judge the actions they do as virtuous or non-virtuous.
Right.
We have a clear conception of that doesn't depend on free will.
Spinoza expresses admiration for certain sorts of actions and deplores or criticizes others without thinking them as blameworthy, solely on the basis of how those actions serve the rational self-interest of their agents.
Exactly.
But one thing is that, so Spinoza says that, like, we are rational, and then we find out what is in our best interest. He has more of like an egoistic theory, which someone might think is kind of going a bit too far. Like, when someone fully, let's see, what is it? Acceptance of egoism might seem too great a price to pay for exits that can elude the problems of moral luck and accommodate itself to determinism.
I wouldn't say that such theories are necessarily egoistic, because we're still living in communities and relationships with other people. I would say, however, that such views are still assuming that people always act as rational, self-interested creatures. And that's the assumption we have seen throughout our study of ethics, that utilitarianism makes, Kantianism makes, and even to some degree virtue ethics can make too.
Is rational self-interest?
So maybe we could do away with free will, live in a causally determined world, while we still assume that people are rational and self-interested. And that could give rise to utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and how they could apply to praise and blame.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't realize that they pulled Spinoza into this. Wow. Okay. Huh.
Yeah, so Spinoza ethics can work a bit better. I think Sloat kind of wanted to not really just have it be egoistic. We could still talk about like viciousness of character to have a problem with it without just being egoistic. He kind of talks about like a dog, where we kind of describe it as vicious or whatever. And we wouldn't blame the dog for being a vicious dog. But it's still something that we don't want because, like, it's bad for everyone involved.
But imagine you could blame a dog for being a quote-unquote vicious dog. I'm wondering two things. Why or how could we claim a dog is vicious if it doesn't have moral agency? And what would it look like to blame someone that doesn't have moral agency?
Well, to blame somebody who doesn't have moral agency, I guess this kind of like starts to seep into like retributive justice versus punitive justice. It's like if we start viewing everything again, I'm not making a claim on where I stand, but I'm saying if we see everything as retributive justice, then everybody would be like the quote unquote vicious dog, and we can begin like controlling people's environments to where it starts to go to what we perceive as better ends. And so I think like one example of where the last thing you said there is what's an example of an instance where we don't see people having like a free will would be in that instance is where we begin to see everything as environmentally causal. What was the first part of that question?
The first part of that question was how could someone, either human or non-human, how could someone who doesn't have moral agency be vicious? And by vicious, I mean non-virtuous, like a negative, wrong, a morally wrong character.
I think I think the perception of viciousness would simply come to, like, at the end of the day, to it's hurting me, and so we attribute like evilness or badness to that action, and where they're not like failing on like some metaphysical level of virtue or failing to obey the law. It's just simply the fact that it's hurting me, and so I'm going to call this thing repulsive and something that should be avoided.
Okay. So I think I'm starting to see a possible connection between virtue ethics and utilitarianism.
Ooh.
And how these two, if we assume the world is completely causally determined, how these two would justify praise and blame. Because there are some things in the world that hurt us.
Yeah.
Some things out there that we don't like.
Right.
And I say we don't like because it is the case that usually people don't admire what causes harm to them.
Right.
But that admiration, then, it seems that the rejection of admiration that harm originates is the basis, or could be the basis, for some virtue ethics.
Yeah. Yeah, virtue ethics. That's a real interesting perspective. I haven't thought of that before. The thing about virtue ethics is that, like, these virtues, they're actions that are assumed to be good in and of themselves, right? Would you say that?
I would say the good for virtue ethics is whatever makes you flourish. And whatever flourishing is, we could explain it in terms of excellence. And whatever excellence is, we need to explain too.
But I don't know if it's just simply whatever helps you flourish, because like for virtue ethics, there are qualities, virtues that makes one excellent. So there's like, I don't know, for instance, bravery, or maybe diligence, or you can make a whole list of the virtues. It's just these are qualities that we have to strive to become excellent in putting out there in the world. I don't know how to say it. Exemplifying. So there are like assumed notions of virtue, and they're good in and of themselves. But my question is, you know, virtue is describing specific actions like bravery, but like where a utilitarian might come along and say, okay, but bravery towards what, or in what situation, you know, like a prison guard, for instance, you can they could be brave, but in what circumstance are they being brave? So it can't be just the moral, it can't be just the virtue. It has to be contextualized within a setting. At least I think that that's how like a utilitarian would view it.
Exactly, yeah, and I think we could bring it back to the praise and blame, free will, causal determinism discussion, in the way that virtue ethics, or virtue, not only describes particular actions in a specific context, but it describes you. It describes your character.
Yeah.
And it's even more particular than whatever circumstances could be. It's extremely particular in the sense that it's you developing a you virtue.
Yeah. Huh.
So I don't know how causal determinism could grapple with that. Maybe we just
That's
assume...
a good point. Yeah.
Because we observe things happening in the world,
Yeah.
whether there is free will or causal determinism. But should we make
So
character
I'm
judgments?
thinking that
Yeah.
you're making you're kind of putting some implicit assumptions a lot when you're talking about this. Hard determinism is what you should be saying when you're talking about the position that free will
Yes.
doesn't exist. So whenever you're talking about, say, hard determinism.
True.
Okay, so
And I say a lot free will or causal determinism. By causal determinism, I usually mean hard determinism.
just why don't you do that from now on so that we can be more clear, because there's quite a lot of people that think that compatibilism is a good position. So
Yes.
Yeah, okay, but we got it.
so hard determinism.
Nicholas was being clear though. Yeah. I think that's where like an instance of where like if virtue ethics is something that we're supposed to become, like we're supposed to become like a metaphysical view of virtue, right? So virtue is something that is it supposed to be decontextualized from everything else that we're in?
Oh, I remember an important part with hard determinism.
Yes.
So one thing that people say in response to like hard determinism is like, well, if we don't have free will, none of our actions matter. And that's problematic, because that would be true if fatalism was true. So fatalism I'm defining here as basically, regardless of your actions, the future will be a certain way. So like, that would be like, you will kill your mother. And then like, okay, so I'm going to run across the world, I'm going to get in my car and, drive way away from her so that doesn't happen. And it turns out she was just walking across the street one day and you ran over her by accident or something. That's fatalism. And but hard determinism, would accept that, you don't have any choice in the matter, but like your actions matter. Like, you actually have to do things that result in your mother being killed for that to happen. It's not just gonna, the universe isn't just gonna magically conspire itself so that regardless of what you do, you're gonna like run over your mother or throw her into a shredder or something.
Would you agree that fatalism is the philosophical view that includes hard determinism and nihilism?
No. Fatalism doesn't include hard determinism because your actions don't matter when it comes to the outcome. That would be fatalism. Whereas with hard determinism, your actions determine the outcome. Everything is determined by previous actions. So, or events. Fatalism is basically something's going to happen and has nothing to do with the events that transpire previously. So even under hard determinism, your actions still your actions will still have influence over the environment. It's just that you don't actually have control over what those actions are, but the actions themselves still matter. And you'd still even want to prescribe other people what you want them to do, because like I say, if you do that, they will do different things. It's just that, you just can't choose whether you're going to do that or not, but it still matters whether you do. So that's like the difference between hard determinism and fatalism. If fatalism is true, yeah, it really doesn't matter what you do.
Because it's gonna happen anyways.
Yeah.
But I thought that was one of the propositions of hard determinism, that everything is already predetermined.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
your actions are what determines what's happening in the future, even if your actions themselves are predetermined. Whereas with fatalism, your actions don't have any influence on what's going to happen in the future. So like the future isn't predetermined by anything previously. It has nothing to do with your actions.
Yeah, that's a hard one to parse out. Because I was also under that assumption, Nicholas.
So under hard determinism, it does, like, your actions still matter.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I thought you were saying the opposite, that in fatalism your actions don't matter.
Yeah, in fatalism,
And in hard determinism they do.
Yes.
Don't.
Yeah.
Fatalism, actions don't matter at all. Hard determinism, your actions still matter.
Oh, do matter. Okay.
Yeah.
My
Under hard determinism, your actions still matter.
I guess my problem. My question would be, is there intentionality in hard determinism that we can call actions or actions?
Yeah, I think like intentionality would be something that would, like, it's a confusion of languages where we begin to, like, when I will do this has like has the assumption that there's like intentionality is something that can separate from causal events. With determinism, I don't know if you can have intentionality. I think it would be like the perception of intentionality. It's
So are you talking about hard determinism or determinism in general?
probably hard determinism.
Okay, so it's just from now on, say hard determinism when you're thinking about the position that there's no free will. Just say compatibilism if you're talking about the position where you think there is free will, and then just say, like, specifically say that you're talking about determinism in general if you're making a position about determinism in general, because so far it seems like you're kind of like conflating determinism with hard determinism, which those aren't necessarily the same views.
Okay, but we can specify before we say.
So say hard determinism, and then say compatibilism if you're talking about compatibilism, and then say determinism generally if you're talking about determinism generally.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like in intentionality, that I think that would kind of assume that. I don't know. It's a confusion of language. I think intentionality might assume that there's a free agent which is able to will things independent of the circumstances.
Okay, so Sloat actually comes up with another argument against moral responsibility. Not exactly free will, but moral responsibility. So his idea was, okay, let's say there's two situations. One, you're driving your car and you're doing it carelessly. Like, I don't know, let's just say like you're looking at your phone while you're driving your car. And then it turns out there was a person walking there and you ran over them. You would say, yeah, that was a bad thing. That person's morally culpable. But what if same situation, everything's the same, but there wasn't a person there? Oh, it seemed that the fact that he ran over the person is a matter of luck. And isn't it kind of reprehensible to say that, whether or not someone's morally responsible or not is due to luck?
If we interpret it in utilitarian terms, yes. But I would be more willing to interpret that both in a deontological and virtue ethics way, because it's not necessarily about the harm we are inflicting on people or the harm we don't inflict on people, but more about the type of person you are and the duties you are not attending to, because why would you put the risk?
Yeah.
Right, under utilitarianism, I don't think responsibility matters at all.
Well, it does if you think that free will is a thing. in utilitarianism.
I think even if free will exists, responsibility doesn't matter at all. So under utilitarianism, free will exists. We don't really give a shit about that. So just do whatever more hedons.
Maybe if we'd accept hard utilitarianism, but it also comes back to, I don't think anyone or someone hardly ever commits themselves to fully one moral theory.
No, I'm pretty sure people do. These philosophers do. So, people do commit themselves to just one theory.
Philosophers do. I don't know about people who are not philosophers, but could be.
And that's so I don't know if I really want to go over this mix and matching too much. Utilitarianism, I'm pretty sure, doesn't care about moral responsibility. I don't think that's really a matter. They really they'd only virtue ethics and deontology probably care about personal responsibility, in that like the person's responsible for the action. So if there's cases of moral luck, that's kind of a problem for like deontology, because you shouldn't really prescribe being that if we both say if we want to say that it's because we wouldn't really want to say that the person doing exactly the same thing, but be due to luck, in one case something bad happens and in the other situation something bad doesn't happen, that they're more or less responsible based on whether or not the person was actually there.
I would like to push back against the idea that even if we consider only utilitarianism as the only valid moral theory, there wouldn't be moral responsibility. But before that, Joey, what do you think about all this?
Well, I don't know. I was just trying to think of whether or not there's free will, moral responsibility is something that matters within utilitarianism specifically. And so far, I have not come to an idea. But I would like to hear what you have to say about it, though.
Yes. So in utilitarianism, we could have different ends depending on the theory and the philosopher. Maybe the end is utility or happiness or pleasure, however we define that. However, there are means to that end, and that doesn't imply that the means are meaningless. It implies that they are less important than the end. Because some utilitarian authors describe the means as intrinsic parts of the end, but they are not valued as ends. So in that understanding of utilitarianism, I could see concepts like praise, blame, moral responsibility. They could work as concepts we use but not necessarily believe in, because those concepts would help further some ideal end like happiness or utility.
That's interesting. So the means aren't as important. Well, actually, they're intrinsically tied up with the end, but they're not the end.
Yeah, so we don't value the means as ends.
Yeah.
We value them as means, and sorry to repeat myself, but more than that, some means are just part of the end, but not the end.
And how would something like free will fit into that?
I don't think utilitarianism cares much whether there is free will or not. That whatever a utilitarian would claim should be not necessarily because they believe in it, even though demonstrating belief and reasonable belief would be useful in the philosophical sense. But even if they don't believe in it, it's just about how they use it to further whatever end they actually believe in.
That's true. Yeah, That's a good point. And I think that's kind of what Smart does, is like does he commit to a position on free will versus determinism? Or does he say, despite it, the role of praise and blame is...
Smart's position on praise and blame is that they're purely to influence behavior and they have nothing to do with assigning responsibility.
Okay.
So same thing, he thinks you should just... So he doesn't care about whether someone's actually responsible, and he thinks that they aren't.
Yes. So I think we could get more into a little more into Smart's conception of praise and blame, then go to specific examples of how that would apply. So something
There you go.
something I really like about Smart's article is that his metaphysical position would be something like, look, free will is a metaphysically confused view, but even he's not trying to disprove it. He's trying to say, look, even if we don't have free will in actuality, we can still use praise and blame. And he says that there are two different functions of praise. First, we praise people because we want to tell them what they are like. It's almost like a descriptive function of praise and blame. And secondly, like Will said, praise also has an encouraging function in that we want people to keep doing certain classes of actions. Now, why do we want to keep doing those? It depends on what you believe and the normative theory we apply. But he says that's the function of praise. And there are also some distinctions Smart makes, like dispraise versus blame and judging versus grading. Do you guys remember any of those or any idea about what those might mean? Alright, so according to Smart, there are significant differences between dispraise and blame. For Smart, dispraise is a function in which we are just grading or evaluating people's actions. And in a very simple way of communicating it is just saying, look, I just don't like this action. I assign it a negative grade, a negative score. But then there is blame, and in contrast to dispraise, blame is a condemnation. It assigns a moral responsibility. And in simple terms, we're saying it's your fault, it's your deficiencies or your excesses that led to you doing this morally wrong action.
Yeah, but with grading, we can just say that, like, we don't like this, or
Yeah.
this isn't good enough, but we're not really saying the person's at fault or whatever. We can just say, like, you're not good for this job, you're not, you don't have the right qualifications or whatever. We don't know whether you're at fault for that or not, but, we just don't want you to do the job.
So where praise might not care whether or not there's moral responsibility, blame definitely does.
Well, we can have a different conception of blame that is dispraise.
Okay.
And dispraise is just assigning a negative score.
Right.
Praise is assigning a positive score.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that he did bring it up, praise and dispraise, rather than blame, because blame kind of requires,
Moral responsibility.
Gotcha.
But if we don't know exactly what free will is...
Yeah, because
we
it
can-
seems like it's a lot worse to blame someone for something they're not responsible for than to praise someone for something they're not responsible for. I'm gonna go over like slow as like kind of more of an alternative to I was already talking a bit about it before, virtue ethics as an alternative to utilitarianism. So he's kind of just saying that with Spinoza, he was kind of like Spinoza was didn't really include any sort of like blaming or praising for people's behavior. He just thought that like it's in people's best interest to be virtuous, and that when they're not doing it, they're being irrational. But he doesn't say anything about like blaming them. So if they're acting viciously, that's just making them worse off, and it's bad, but it's not. They don't necessarily have any fault. Now, one problem I have is that's egoistic, but there's really no reason we have to take the egoistic term. We could say that viciousness is bad for other reasons, like it hurts other people, or that justice is a good thing, and things should be fair, or that some other thing. So like, whereas with utilitarianism, you kind of have to like get rid of most moral terms in general or normative expressions. With virtue ethics, when there's no praise or blame, you just have to get rid of the praise or blame terms. You can still have like justice and stuff like that. No need to eliminate all normative expressions, just the ones relating to praise and blame. So that's what Sloat kind of brings up.
How does virtue ethics keep praise and blame?
It doesn't is under Sloat's one.
Okay.
He's saying that like when someone's being vicious as well, like we say, well, his parents abused him and stuff like that, and that's why he's vicious. And we can still say, well, it's bad that he's vicious. He's hurting other people. He's hurting himself. He's making everything worse in regard. And we can say that into other things, like, with justice, like, there's an unfair distribution here. But we don't have to say anything about, like, whether anyone's to blame for that unfair distribution. You just say there's an unfair distribution and we should fix that. So it's like it's an alternative to utilitarianism that also doesn't require free will, which is why he brings it up. Like, because maybe we don't want utilitarianism because utilitarianism kind of has a lot of counterintuitive things that we don't really again, the doctor example was one that was given, which I don't know how true this is, but 5 patients go into a clinic. No, 5 patients are in a clinic and they're going to die, and then one person enters in, and then and then we kind of okay, so it turns out that this guy has all the organs we need for these 5 other people. The doctor finds that out. It's like, okay, so what should the doctor do? Should he cut up the dude and put his parts into the 5 other people and save them, or not do that and then have the 5 people die? Also, I'm assuming here that the one person didn't consent to what's going on.
Because utilitarianism would override consent in most
So,
understandings.
maybe we could say, with virtue ethics, maybe we can get rid of that situation. For one, the doctor, has, there's the virtue, do not do harm. Being a virtuous doctor involves, that sort of, you're healing people. Your job isn't to harm people, and doing that would be doing harm.
Mm-hmm.
Also, gets in the way of, justice. It's not really... I'm not really sure how it exactly rates, but I think virtue ethics would probably handle that a lot better than utilitarianism's. Why a lot of that stuff probably wouldn't be very good. It'd be rather ruthless.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't particularly care for utilitarianism, is that there are just so many more facets to what it means to live rather than just the pain pleasure binary. And I think that when we have the world reduced to just that simple pair, then we cut off a lot of other things which are meaningful to us.
But yeah, so Sloat is kind of basically offering us an alternative here that allows us to have some sort of non-utilitarian ethical theory, which would be virtue ethics. So if you don't like utilitarianism, but you think free will doesn't exist, this is a possible alternative. I think maybe we should go on to specific examples now about how this relates.
Before that, I would like to raise only one more point concerning Sloat's arguments.
Yeah.
So you say that, I think Will and Joey, you two would agree that if we live in a world with hard determinism, virtue ethics would be preferable to utilitarianism, correct?
I'm not actually sure, but we can go along that lines.
Yeah, at least we can agree that utilitarianism seems more problematic than virtue ethics.
Yeah, I'll say yeah.
All right, but then I want to push back against that assumption and saying that at least utilitarianism is more action guiding in the following sense. Utilitarianism at least establishes that praise and either dispraise or blame can have a very particular function, and that is you're going to tell people what you expect them to do or not to do. However, I have a question. If we apply virtue ethics, what do we do? And then again, assuming we live in a hard deterministic world, what do we do if a person is acting viciously and we want them to not continue acting viciously?
I mean, I think in that setting, though, praise and blame would be you're failing to exemplify the essence of virtue, right? And so I think that even within virtue ethics, it is still action guiding, because you're failing to display a quality of being.
And I guess with like if someone was like dealing with a vicious person, they would like kind of be brave if they like restrained them and stuff like that. So like there's like or like if there's like a virtue to like I don't know. I should probably look up what virtue ethics is. I'm just gonna
You
give some
know what
examples.
they are.
Well, there's courage. I remember
Yeah.
courage. There's like courage. Generosity might be a new one that they might add in.
Yeah, that's the thing though.
I'm thinking, like, is there one what would be related to like protecting your other community members?
I mean, I think bravery was a good one.
But like, what's good about stopping the vicious person?
Well, I was thinking it of in terms of how would assigning or making, whatever it is, how would the assigning of praise and blame help you become more virtuous? Because that should be your goal in virtue ethics, not only to strive to make a community more virtuous, but to make you more virtuous.
So I think in Sloat's paper, he was actually even saying that we kind of even reject that terminology altogether.
Not necessarily egotistic, because virtue would imply that.
Oh no, not egotistic. I'm just saying he was kind of talking about eliminating the terminology of praise and blame from the.
Yeah.
Though he did say here, in other words, that even if claims of blameworthiness of the like have no objective validity, people shouldn't be generally encouraged to stop making such claims or told that they ultimately lack ethical validity, and it can allow that even if we turn out to be metaphysically unfree, it may well be best to keep that esoteric. So he might have been actually saying that we should use that terminology, even if it's false, if that so happens to make people more virtuous, or that's like the virtuous thing to do. He disagrees with Spinoza. Spinoza thought that he was helping people by disseminating his views, but Sloat thinks, maybe we should actually make this esoteric so the normal person doesn't actually know about this. Which is similar to utilitarianism, because like utilitarianism often kind of has this view is like, well, utilitarianism isn't actually the best ethical theory to follow if you want to promote utilitarianism. So if you're a utilitarian, you should actually be promoting some other ethical view instead, so that people are actually happier, because when people pursue happiness directly, they're usually less happy.
Yeah, I mean, but that's like what I'm talking about. It's like when there is a pursuit of a certain type of happiness, though. And like one could easily imagine maybe like material well-being and plentifulness or everything as like one qualification of happiness or well-being. But then everything in your life, all of like your ontological existence is like oriented towards achieving that end, when there may be more to life.
I think you
than
could
just
have a
simply
pretty
that.
open definition of pleasure to cover a lot of things, and then just say that if you're getting some of those things, you're well off. You could go the mill route. I don't think the mill route is very good.
Me
with the
neither.
higher pleasures.
I wrote my paper on that one. I don't like his idea of competent judges and higher order pleasures. I don't like that at all. But
Do you think we should move over to particular situations now? or
sure. So like
The prison system is a very relevant example
is
of this.
a good one.
Do you want to talk about, who wants to talk about that?
But there's also another one, just to get them on the table. There's also one like like mental illness would be a good one as well. But yeah, the prison system. So people are born in certain circumstances which lend themselves to what the dominant society would classify as criminal activity. And so if it's simply just it's not retributive. No, it is. What's the word for putting blame on somebody? Retributive versus...
Retributive would be...
Versus restorative.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and retributive is not just putting blame on someone. I think that's also where you're punishing them based on that blame.
Yeah, retributive versus restorative is a distinction between types of justice and justice theories.
Yeah, restorative is more, there's what was it again?
Retributive?
Retributive, then there's restorative, then there's another one which is, had to do with disclining behavior, making people less likely to do it.
Yeah, but I think like restorative and the one that you're thinking of right there kind of go together or be pretty synonymous.
They often go together. Yeah.
Yeah, Will, maybe are you thinking about rehabilitation?
No. I'm talking about like preventing other people from doing crimes. Like so, like you punish someone so that other people won't want to do it.
Oh, the deterrence.
Deterrence, yeah.
Yeah, but I
So,
think like
we
retributive
have
and deterrent. would go-
Retributive, deterrence, and
Restorative, rehabilitative.
restorative,
Okay.
rehabilitative.
But
So
the point is, though, like these people are born in circumstances which would lend themselves to crime, and so if there's a retributive justice system that's putting the sole blame on one individual for making those actions, it ignores the circumstances which developed those actions in the first place. So a restorative or a system that would look at like broader environmental context would say, well, okay, but these environmentals, the societal norms, these are the things that made you who you are, and so it kind of displaces.
So are you
Soul
more
blame.
going along the hard determinist side here in regards to this?
I mean, that's what it would lend itself to, I feel.
So the hard determinism seems to more lend itself to like deterrence and restorative, because, or at least very least not retributive.
No, I think it would, because if it's that's the smarter route to go if you're trying to mold a society in a certain way, is to look at the broader context instead of simple just
Well,
punishment.
no, what I mean, so yeah, that's what I'm saying is that like with hard determinism, retribution makes no sense,
Right.
Because no one's to blame for the actions,
Right.
So like that would make more sense. The only things you would really want to be looking at are like restorative or redistributive. I guess you could even still have compatibilism and still think those other things are better if you just think that like, because like I mean even if free will exists in general, that doesn't mean that every action is free. So like
Yeah.
even if you think there's free will, maybe like say someone's from a poor neighborhood, they have to steal food to get to be able to live and stuff like that. It's
Right.
like they don't really have much of a genuine choice there. It's either
Yeah. It's do or die.
yeah. So you don't necessarily have to be a hard determinist to think that retributive justice isn't a good idea.
Right.
But hard determinism makes that pretty simple. Hard determinism like kind of explicitly denies that retribution would make any sense.
Yeah, and I mean, where do we go from here though? It's like one thing I would say about restorative justice is that it's kind of the question of, well, what system is it restoring people to? How does it make what are you restoring that citizen to? What image are you remolding this person into? What system? And I think that a lot of times when we think of merely restorative justice, we assume that it kind of really depends.
So you're kind of saying like the system might be responsible for the fact that they were criminals in the first place, and
Right.
like
It's-
maybe instead of thinking this person needs to change, we should be thinking about changing the system that made them that way.
Yeah, but I would also be suspect of but I'd also be suspect about the system. Like, it's very, I don't know, it seems very patronizing or paternalistic.
So like trying to like restore them, like that might be a thing with like restorative or rehabilitation. It's like
I think it's a
we're
nice
kind of making decisions for people. And
Yeah.
that like this is the way you should be.
right, and I mean, like for a lot of these, we can.
So
it
that
could
might
be really nice.
that might be a reason for like why we wouldn't go with the restorative route, is that we respect people's decisions, and so like we shouldn't be trying to mold them to be a certain way.
So
Yeah.
should we just not do anything?
I mean, that's kind of the
Well,
thing.
we still have deterrence if
Yeah.
we think that the decisions they're making are bad. So I guess we do have to be making a judgment on what decisions they should be making. Like they shouldn't be deciding to do crime.
Well,
Yeah, so in your arguments, and I have no arguments or opinions because of the changing nature of the podcast and what we believe, I think that the issue of the justice system is it's about both how we evaluate other people's actions and characters and what we are going to do with them. Because it's not merely that we think some things about them, it's that we want to do something about them.
Yeah. It's just it's a very utilitarian.
Oh yeah, so yeah, utilitarianism. So that this utilitarianism has some pretty bad things with like the justice system. One would be like it might make sense to criminalize someone even if they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Which actually, like, if the reason that you're putting people into prison has to do with reasons that don't have to do with retribution or whatever, why should our decisions about putting people into prison have anything to do with whether they actually committed a crime?
Do you guys think the prison system would disappear if we decide to go restorative route?
Oh, there might
Or
still be
the
one, but we're
prison
just
system
not.
as
We're
we
just
know it.
we're just not putting people in jail because we think that they're bad. We're just doing it for other reasons.
I think it might fundamentally change in the way we go about disciplining quote unquote people, because restorative would still be disciplining people. It's just in a way to make them better citizens.
Anyway, deterrence would still give a reason as to why we punish people, but it would be a different reason. So we might still punish them, but it wouldn't be because they did anything wrong. It's just like, hey, look how much this sucks. Don't do crime, or you'll be like, you'll have to do this crappy stuff.
Yes, I do agree with you that deterrence is an extremely, maybe even an exclusively utilitarian reason for putting people into prison. But because of the absurd consequences we reach as, well, maybe we should just imprison innocent people, and that maximizes utility. Because of that, I don't think either of us is going to commit to any form of deterrence or view that supports deterrence.
But yeah, so with hard determinism kind of gets rid of the retribution aspect. Utilitarianism doesn't really care about the position of free will. I think it works quite well with hard determinism, but I think it works with like any kind of conception. Deontology would probably have a different. I think deontology would probably have a more retributive view for the prison
I think
system.
so. I think.
I don't think so.
No, really?
No.
Why not?
Because in deontology, we still have to, well, at least in the Kantian version of deontology, we still have to follow the moral law. We have to treat people not merely as means. They are ends in themselves.
Yeah.
They deserve respect and all of this. Maybe they could still be imprisoned and be subject to a retributive system, but not necessarily. It doesn't have to be that way.
No. So I think with retribution is something that could work under deontology.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, the deontology kind of works, and it might even support it possibly if we're talking about like what actions are sensible. Another one is virtue ethics in like a hard determinist sense might also support retribution.
In what sense?
Sure about.
How would supporting that make you or the convicts more virtuous?
Well, it might have to do with justice. Like, you do something bad to someone that, if someone does something wrong, justice is that they get punished for that. So that would be like the retribution, or, that's what's fair.
I'm not sure about virtue ethics, but I was just thinking about deontology. It's like, I hope I didn't lose my train of thought. It's like, Kant says that somebody who fails to be rational is not exercising their agency or their will. But he never. I wonder if he goes into like an idea of criminal punishment. It's like, what do you do after somebody has failed to be rational in like a major way, like murder?
If we look at Kant, there's some things I heard about it. I should probably verify this. Kant was, I think, in favor of the death penalty. I think he even said that if there's a bunch of convicts on an island and for whatever reason there's some sort of danger that happens and you need to leave, you are obligated to kill all those convicts before you leave the island.
Well, we're not saying Kant was perfect and totally consistent in what he had to say. It's just, I'm wondering, how like a Kantian framework would kind of work in, okay, somebody violates the categorical imperative in a major way. What happens to them afterwards?
Well, according to Kant, and I just checked, Kant is in favor of retributive justice. He says that the punishment has to be as equal as the negative moral worth of the crime or the morally wrong action.
Mm-hmm.
He says that punishment is a way to balance out the negative moral worth that now exists in the universe.
The negative moral worth
Mhm.
that exists in the universe.
Yes.
I think that why would that make things okay? Like, how would the punishment balance? Why would the punishment balance out the negative moral worth? Does he say
That's
that?
the question. So it is the type of explanation that if you don't agree with Kantianism or deontology in general,
Yeah.
you wouldn't really agree with. Kant would say that the categorical imperative reveals a deontic obligation revealed by pure reason, that it is categorically obligatory
Yeah.
to punish criminals,
Yeah.
and thus agree with retribution and retributive justice.
Oh, I'm going to the one about the moral worth one
Yeah.
that was before. I think that one is good.
Yes, let's check that. So before, according to what I just looked up, he says that it's a way to balance out or maybe even redeem negative moral worth.
I just found this here. Kant's mature view is that punishing in the absence of a retributive justification treats criminals as mere means. But if we emphasize another... one second. Oh, God.
That's like the paternalistic thing, like
Yeah.
we were
Maybe.
talking about,
Mhm.
and that we're kind of like, we're kind of like not treating.
Oh.
Yeah, if we are trying to like push people into being better citizens, or okay, all right, you screwed up, but it's not your fault. We're going to put you along the right channels to become a better citizen. That's not making.
Yeah, we're
that's
treating
using
them.
somebody
Yeah,
as a-
without the retributive reason, we are treating them as mere means.
That
when
is
we put
me-
people in
Like
the
the
prison.
puppets of circumstance and not people who make their own decisions.
Right.
But-
Well,
but-
we're treating them as mere means without the retributive reason. Like, we're just saying, like, we want you to be this way, and we're going to make you this way regardless of what you want. But whereas if we have the retributive reason, then we actually have a justification.
Yeah.
We're not treating them as mere means. We're treating them based on the actions they made. In that we punish criminals or something like that.
Interesting.
What's the rest? Did he say more?
So that was just a paper that I found here,
Yeah, say the rest.
but that really puts us along a good track here. Let me see if I can find the rest.
maybe retribution is justified after all.
Well, yeah, because that really is a thing. Because you kind of really are like, if you're not doing it for that reason, all the other reasons have to be kind of like would be things that have to do with not treating the person as an end.
To me, it's still about disrespecting moral agency. Like, oh, it's not your fault. You didn't do it. You didn't choose to do it.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, so like you're respecting the person's agency when you punish them for the crime they committed. But if you're doing it for other reasons, you're not
Yes.
respecting. You're treating them as a mere means.
To achieve whatever goal we have.
Yeah, such
Yeah.
as restoration or deterrence.
Yes.
We're using you as a means to deter other people from committing crimes.
But my only problem with that conception of preferring retributive justice according to Kantianism would be that we are still assuming they have free will. It only works if they do have free
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. So compatibilism. So this would be compatibilism or free will libertarianism.
Yeah.
Which, as before, that those positions do have some trouble with like moral luck. Compatibilism has issues with like brainwashing scenarios. But yeah, I would say that if we have to take a free will approach if that's going to make sense. Free will libertarianism or compatibilism, it wouldn't work under hard determinism. Retribution makes no sense for hard determinism.
And you guys have claimed that a couple of times now, that retribution doesn't make sense if we live in a hard deterministic world. I will I would like to present an alternative view in which it could be possible, but I'm gonna wait for Joey if he wants to say something else about Kantianism and retribution.
Yeah, I'm almost to the point here, but give me 1 second and I should find the full quote.
Alright, so another topic we can go into is kind of like environmentalism, and I think that deontology might not really be the best way to deal with that problem, because like, you know, we're kind of all like we're kind of talking about the environment, like well, you know, who's causing the problem, who's at fault, who can we litigate and stuff like that, and you know, well, why would deontology be a problem with that? Is our legal system is more based on deontology, isn't it?
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so anyway. But what I was explaining to Nicholas here just a second ago was, do you know that like the spaceship model of the world, where the globe and all of nature is seen as something like we're all on the same spaceship, so let's take care of it the best we can, right? The thing is, when we do that, we've basically taken like transformed nature and like wildness of just letting it be to something that has to be controlled in order to maximize the greatest good. Whereas with deontology, while it's true that nature isn't something, it isn't a person, it's something that could, it's been argued by like deontological philosophers talking about environmentalism, it's something that could be respected in and of itself. It could be classified as a person. It's not able to enter into like the categorical imperative and such, but because it's a necessity that we need to think about nature, we just classify it as a person. But in that case, it's not something that we can assert dominance over. So to a certain extent, with utilitarianism, while the wild is something that can't exist anymore, with deontology, since we can't exert our will to influence nature for the total good, it has to be something that we have to step out of, that we have to step back into, and we can't assert our dominance over it as much as we have now. Although, you know, for deontology, humans exist, and so there is a certain extent to which we still have to exploit nature to a certain extent, but not as much as the spaceship model that utilitarianism doesn't. So how this contributes to our discussion about retributive versus restorative is that a restorative sense of nature would be, I think, personally anyway, it would fit in very nicely with this spaceship model of the world, versus retributive, which is, I guess nature is seen, you know, if we classify it as a person.
Nature. It hurt us, and we shall hurt it. And we are hurting it. We're succeeding against this fucking beast. We're punishing it for all it's worth. We're burning it alive.
Yeah, it's like the ants and the orcs. I don't know, but it would be
fuck nature.
It would be to where up to this point we've been exploiting nature, which, you know, under this setting would be classified as a person, and so we need to step back. So I think that, of course I made a lot of assumptions, and I may be not communicating it very well, but that's what I know about like deontological philosophers talking about nature. And there's also virtue ethics applied to nature as well, which is very fascinating. I found this one paper on it. It was talking about, so there's somebody who wants, let's say there's a utilitarian environmentalist. There's a mean one, and then there's a nice one. So the mean one's like, all of nature should be dominated so that we can use it for the greatest good. But then there's the spaceship model, which is the nice one. It's like, well, we all live on the same planet, so let's take care of it the best we can. But both of those are saying that nature is something that needs to be controlled and submitted and systematized. Whereas with virtue ethics, it's like, why would you want to do that? Is it a virtue to want to dominate somebody? in this case, virtue ethics would be distinguishable from deontological. Is that deontology would recognize nature as like human versus virtue ethics, which doesn't necessarily need to do that. It just needs to say, hey, this dominating urges that you have as a utilitarian, that's not virtuous at all. And so a virtuous existence with nature is something, well, I don't know. To me, it seems that like something that would be like much more. I don't know. I'll just say that I would prefer virtue ethics or deontology over a utilitarian view of nature.
So with deontology, I was actually looking this up. It's like some of them kind of like some deontologists think that like we should be treating animals and like kind of like biological organisms as their own moral their own agents with like their own ends.
Huh.
And that that would be kind of their view with that.
That's an excellent point. It's like
That would be kind of the question, like, do animals have free will?
well, the thing is, if you like recognize like a species as something inherently that needs to be respected, that would work very well with like the preservation of all sorts of species that have to necessarily be go extinct because we prize certain species over others for utilitarian purposes. Like, I don't know, the rainbow speckled toad in the Amazon. That's not of much use versus clearing the land for like cattle or whatever. Versus if from a deontological perspective, if you start putting personhood onto species, we should respect it because it's something to be respected in and of itself. It's this species has its own personhood, quote unquote.
So there are ways to deal with nature in a deontological way.
I think so, but I also think that you can be a mean deontologist ethicist because I think we discussed this briefly with Caleb, but I asked what do deontologists think about like veganism? And it's like deontologists aren't going to necessarily put animals on the same footing as humans who are, of course, rational and able to enter into the universal law of the something imperative, the categorical imperative. So they should be respected, just not as much as humans, which is an interesting tension between the nice deontologists and the mean deontologists who might be Kant.
Oh wait, I remember there's another there was like a psychological experiment. This has to do with free will. You remember that one where they were determining whether someone's actions were decided at the time that they made the action or sometime before it? What was that? Can you search that up? That might be relevant.
I think I remember what you're talking about. It's like our brains make the decision to do an action before we actually do it.
That one, I'm not really sure that has any problems for free will under the compatibilist view. Under free will libertarianism, that would be a problem. But under the compatibilist view, it's like, why would that be a problem? It's still our brain doing it.
Yeah. I don't know. When it comes to the question, just very broadly, I'll say this. When it comes to the question of free will and determinism, I think the
Hard
way
determinism,
just everything,
generally?
just
Yeah.
determinism
Okay.
generally. I think we have a language problem when we're trying to talk about these metaphysical ideas. We use words when we're trying to describe metaphysical concepts that are just way too blurred and messy and.
Well, I think one problem as well when we're talking about free will, we already brought this up, is that language kind of has some influence on our thoughts in this. It's like or the subject-object distinction.
Right.
That kind of makes us think that we're a subject that are doing things on objects, whereas if language was done a different way, we might not. We might not think that way. I don't know how would you construct an language without a subject?
I don't know, but that's one of the reasons why I say, despite what it may be, like,
I guess you could just describe events, like just say like a thing is just get rid of the thing. Just say like raining, fire,
yeah,
burning,
yeah.
but don't really say that something is burning. Just say burning.
But yeah, let me just say real quick. So like this messiness between being able to make metaphysical claims and the language we use makes that's why I kind of hold on to the position of, despite what it may be in reality, we construct another reality that we work with, and that's how we function.
Oh, that would just be more. We're kind of So you're just saying that the psychological state people have.
Yeah, I suppose so.
So that doesn't. I don't know how much bearing that has on whether there's free will or not.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
It might have some bearing on like how
Well,
we treat the issue. It's like how we deal with other people.
I think it may not like address, it may not commit to determinism or free will like explicitly, but it does step out of the question and ask, all right, well, while we're trying to figure out which one works best or which is actually true, how do we function, and how do we come up with these metaphysical questions in the first place, which is a result of the language we use.
I think that would be, not necessarily would be, it would run the risk of putting the cart behind the horse. Is that the correct expression?
Putting the cart behind the cart in front of the horse?
Putting the cart in front of the horse,
Okay.
yes. Sorry for that.
You're good.
Because we're saying that language shapes the way in which we view reality.
Mm-hmm.
It does seem that like language reflects some assumptions we have about free will, namely that free will exists, that we can choose for ourselves, we could have done otherwise, etc.
Yeah.
However, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's that we have these assumptions first, and then we develop a language that expresses those assumptions. So I don't think language is necessarily responsible or to blame. To blame. It's not to blame for the way in which we view the world. We start by viewing the world in a certain way, and then language just reflects that fact.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I still think that works into my idea, though. It's like we have assumptions about ontology rooted in our language, and then we use that to try to, explore outside of, we try to use this language which has fundamental assumptions about our state of being to explore outside of itself. It's like you're trying to use language to speak outside of itself, using thought to think outside of itself. It doesn't make much sense, and it gets really messy.
Maybe another way in which we can frame that distinction you're trying to get at is to discuss cognitive science and formal systems. In that, according to Gödel, and this would be too complicated to explain, and it's not the nature of this podcast, but according to Gödel, there can't be consistent formal systems because they would just explode.
Yeah.
There can be complete formal systems. But maybe the ability that we have with our human brains or human minds or whatever you want to call it is that we can step into a formal system and step out of it into other formal systems.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, to get back on track, what were we using? Oh yes, we stopped at environmentalism and then free will. We kind of went on.
And then restorative versus retributive justice. And I had a question for you, Joey. I understand how different theories may apply to our interpretations of the environment.
Yeah.
However, it wasn't that clear to me how they connect to the topics we have been discussing, like free will, praise and blame.
Yeah, so for like the environmental thing, for as how it connects to, like praise and blame, restorative versus retributive.
I guess it would connect to who's causing the environmental problems.
Well, I was going to what I was going to say, well, yeah, I could work there as well, but how I was chiefly thinking about it was, in like, if we hold on to a restorative view of the prison system, I think it would fundamentally change, well, the prison system, but it would also kind of increase the amount of control that whoever makes this restorative system. So, okay, let me try to map this out. I think the spaceship model maps this out very well. It's like there's all sorts of in order to maximize the good, all of nature, all of the wild needs to be oriented towards providing maximum pleasure, right? And the same thing is true with like a society that holds on to restorative. It's where the domain of control like extends to everything. So for these prisoners, let me hold on.
Yes, I just want to make clear issues of restorative and retributive justice and free will, praise and blame in connection to environmentalism, if there are any.
Yeah, so a restorative notion of the environment, I think, would be a very utilitarian one, and it's likened to that of the prison system, where everybody who does something bad needs to be oriented to become a perfect citizen.
I think the issue I'm trying to get at is that we don't believe, or at least we don't act as if we believe, that nature has some moral agency.
Yeah.
Or that nature can be praised and blamed.
Yeah. But I would agree with you there, and that's why some like a deontological philosopher would say, okay, that may be the case, but that's something that we need to change about our perception of nature.
When praise and blame, I was more talking about people causing the problem, like fossil fuel companies and stuff, and how we should deal with them. There's kind of a problem also in like criminal cases, is that they kind of say like who are they wronging when they do this? There isn't like any specific person, which I think is a kind of more of a problem with the legal system, is that it's always like there has to be a specific person that they're
And
causing
not
a problem,
groups.
not groups.
That's interesting, because aren't they classified as persons, some of them, and so they have all the legal rights as a person, but they are like massive global networks of companies strung together, and
and so there's like this
person.
asymmetry where like business people are allowed to have a group function as one person, but like
you can still sue companies and they suffer punishments if you win the lawsuit.
Well, yeah, but then it's like one person against the company, or a company against a company, but not like a group of people who aren't a company against the company.
True. Yeah, it turns the attention
There's like this
from
asymmetry, and this is a problem because the one person is usually worse at defending themselves than a company would be.
Yeah, you have like high class lawyers versus this one. Oh,
Okay,
man.
so I'm still interested in what issues of free will, praise and blame would be in those situations.
Well, yeah, I guess just the situation would be, I don't know, what should we do with the fossil fuel people?
Well, I think what I was trying to get at just a second ago was that it turns the attention from an individual. Well, it turns the attention to an individual instead of a systemic view of how things work, which I think, to be honest, utilitarianism might get at much more efficiently.
Oh, so like if we're talking about praise and blame, we're kind of talking about individuals where it might be more of a collective problem. Like, I mean, for one, like we could just blame like one guy in the fossil fuel company and blame him for everything.
Yeah, that would
like,
be an interesting question, and it connects to these examples we've been talking about. Can we or should we praise and blame collectives and not only individuals?
Well,
and can the collective have free will? Like kind of group of people function as an agent.
Even if it didn't.
A lot of people would say no. It's no. It's not something that. At that point, when it becomes like a big mass of people, it's from what I've read, it's treated as more of something as like an object than something that can exert will. It's something that's moved along by external circumstances then.
But isn't it the case that we do sometimes blame very large collectives of people? Like,
Yeah.
some people blame humanity for their problems, others blame
Oh, for sure.
society.
Yeah,
They
and
say society is to blame.
yeah, but there are also circumstances of where we'll personify objects or things that we think are objects. Like, what's the name of that one girl in class who's like, who's talking about her dog, and it's like, she,
Katie.
yeah, Katie, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, maybe it has a will of its own, maybe, but a lot of people would be, or at least some people would be inclined to say it's an animal, it's driven by instincts only. But you'll see an interesting case of where Katie's like, no, it's like she treats it as something that has its own will. And so, again, I think this is a circumstance where language gets messy with how, we'll play these language games of where we'll use one word in a totally different circumstance and it just doesn't carry over.
At least in the situation of a dog, we say maybe the dog has a
Oh,
will.
so Joey, you brought up.
Wait, hold on. Let Nicholas
Yeah,
finish
sorry.
just real quick.
What would be the difference or the linguistic misunderstanding when saying we have a will and then the dog has a will?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's a difficult question. I just wanted to throw it out.
If I had to answer, okay, if I were looking at this from naturalistically, I would agree and say, yeah, we are making a mistake by saying that we have will versus the dog not having will. We're both animals, but where
Bring animal trials back.
another part of me wants to say that language is a big key to how I don't know, it creates just like a different reality almost of where that we work with, and so that's where we have all our notions of will and blame and everything involved in there.
Okay, so I'm going back to your position. I think you were talking about this, more that an idea of like introspective evidence that we have free will. It's like, when we're acting, we see that like we're experiencing freedom when we're doing actions, or when we're consciously or deliberating on actions. So
Okay.
that would be another one was that there was another view that maybe free will is more of a thing that is like epistemically basic. So like it doesn't require any further support. I guess this would be like a self-evident truth maybe. That was like another idea put forth.
Maybe not necessarily self-evident, but we could also interpret it as being something so simple it's indefinable, yet we understand it.
So one thing is this works for something to be a basic belief. It has to be like instinctive, unreflectively held for all or most human beings, and that it be embedded in regular experience, and that it is central to understanding an important aspect of the world. So our belief in free will seems to meet that criteria. So that would be a possible response. Another response, of course, is if we think moral responsibility is something that exists. Again, we have to think that free will exists if free will is necessary for that. What do you guys think about that?
Can you say that again, please?
The last part?
Yeah.
Oh well, if we think that moral responsibility exists and that free will is necessary for moral responsibility to exist, then we would also have to accept that free will exists.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because
So like, maybe instead, like, rather than arguing directly for free will, you could argue for moral responsibility and then go along that line.
but
I
then you would still need to accept the claim that if free will then moral responsibility. That's
Yeah,
the claim
that's
you're making?
basically it. If you have that claim, if you prove that moral responsibility exists, you know that free will. Free will exists.
I think it should go the other way around, because if you say if free will, then moral
Oh
responsibility.
yeah, that's wrong. Yeah, it's if moral responsibility exists, then free will exists. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
wait. Yeah, that's
All right.
that's the right way.
But then
So free will is necessary for moral responsibility.
that would make the argument valid if you could prove moral responsibility exists or is true.
Yeah, it would be a basic modus ponens.
Yes, but then I would have to question the causal or explanatory connection between the two.
So
which we could make.
if there's maybe moral responsibility doesn't necessitate free will. That would be a direction.
All right. I think yeah.
Well, real quick, kind of in the last few minutes we have here, I don't know. There was one last topic that I wanted to talk about, and that was just like ethics in general, and what do you think that the end is for ethics? Is it like
The categorical imperative, net pleasure or virtue,
That's just keywords.
yeah,
care ethics.
yeah, throw it out there, but like yeah, what do you guys think? I'm pretty curious.
The way I'm thinking about it is, why did we even decide to record a podcast? Why even talk about issues like this? I care about them. I am interested. I want to learn more. I don't know exactly why. I would love to hear your guys' opinions on that.
Alright, so if we're talking about that, so there's the endpoint of the ethics. There's also another related question, which is why be ethical?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess those might be a bit two different questions.
Well, I'll take a shot. So, all right, if we consider like virtue ethics, and Aristotle's view of ethics was very tied with the social, right, and the political, and it was supposed to be something for society to do. For Kant, it turns into like a universal law, and we can access that law through rationality. For utilitarianism, which I think is the most explicit, the pain-pleasure binary that we're pursuing makes a society of well-being. And so for all of, and we can actually extend this to care ethics as well, as where relationships is very social. And for all of these, it comes as a way of wanting to find the best way or the most desirable way to structure a society. And so I do think that ethics is a very structuring sort of attitude towards the world, in which we want to find specific actions that will be best for society. I think it's very tied to notions of power and what people think is an acceptable form of governance. And so I think that ethics has to necessarily take a slice of what we think is a meaningful human existence and say, okay, this is the one that is most desirable. That's what I think about ethics. I think it's very, it's very powered. It definitely wants to control people.
Alright, so I think care ethics wouldn't actually fall into that necessarily. With care ethics, it's just kind of saying like you just care about the person, so, and it just tells you how you do caring relationships. And you care about this person, so you want your relationship with the person to be a caring relationship, so you go about this. So that would be a way that ethics wouldn't kind of just be imposed on someone. They would be, doing it of their own volition. Another one would be virtue ethics, probably. Virtue ethics would be one where it's like, you're kind of cultivating like a virtuous character and stuff like that, and kind of doesn't necessarily seem like you're just kind of like being imposed from above. It's just through practical experience you learn to behave better.
Well, but I think that that's a notion of like power that we often overlook, is that power doesn't need to be something that's imposed from above by somebody putting their boot on our face. It can be something that's like distributed among us, and it can be implicit. Like virtue ethics, for example, has notions of virtue that are just taken to be good in and of themselves. You should be a brave person. You should be diligent, conscientious, and such to be a virtuous person. But that's deeply rooted into cultural ideas of what virtue is in the first place, which again ties itself to.
Oh, and like that's actually care ethics. Like a lot of those would probably have to do with like public stuff, like the stuff that men are doing. Like men treating themselves as like these independent agents, where we're actually kind of like depend on other people. This actually brings up also in regards to free will. Is that we're dependent on other people. So like, our actions are at least in some way determined by, who we're dependent on. Like we can't do things if we're not provided care.
Yeah, in that sense, people are just another part of the causal web. People become these environmental factors too.
So like, if we're talking about like if someone's responsible, it's like, maybe they weren't like, cared for properly or something, or they're, that's the thing.
Yeah, but do you remember for care ethics, we were discussing last week about, well, a few of us were kind of ripping Caleb about how care ethics justifies, these essential, well, how it justifies a caring relationship as the good, right? And of course, Caleb wrote up on the board the web, and there's all sorts of qualities that make up a caring relationship, but those are like specific actions, and I think this is very similar to virtue ethics in that it assumes that these things are equal to the good, just like
virtue ethics, care ethics doesn't have the good. There's goods.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know it would it has goods, but each of those are
individual goods
in
particular situations.
Yeah.
So it's not actually justifying.
Well, okay, it's not one good, but so it can be
Generalist
several. It can be several goods that are together go into what make up the caring relationship. A caring relationship is the basic building block.
I think like your point about ethics being imposed makes more sense with like utilitarianism and deontology.
No, but here's the thing.
Care ethics doesn't really kind of seems to avoid that.
But the thing is, I think you're missing when you miss over like something like virtue ethics or care ethics, you're missing on the different forms that power can take. It's like the difference between the nice utilitarian and the mean utilitarian, where the nice utilitarian is the one who's like, let's make the globe a giant spaceship to take care of, which is a nice way of saying let's control everything, versus the mean utilitarian, who in my opinion would be like someone like Bentham or Mill, who's like quantity and quality, and the quality is determined by competent masters. And so I think if you look into it, virtue ethics and care ethics still fall into it. They're just in different forms.
I agree with you guys that ethics is about how we treat other people. To me, it seems really, really difficult to say that ethics or any moral action, for that matter, can exist if you were isolated as a single human being with no other relationships to establish. We can establish ethics at the level of interpersonal relationships, or even society at large, and both seem to be what we want to discuss and learn more about. However, I don't think morality is about relationships of power. Not that it can't recognize relationships of power, but it's not about them fundamentally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I would actually, when you're talking about relationships, I'd say that parts of morality would have to be determined by relationships with others. Possibly other parts don't have to have other people. Being courageous might be one of those. Like, you can be courageous even if no one else is around. Like, you can jump over some, gap or something.
Yeah, in that sense, it's weird because you can always have that relationship with yourself. So
Well,
I
yeah,
don't
you can
know.
also treat
Yeah.
yourself badly, which
Exactly.
like you're engage in self harm and stuff like that, which is seems like it's wrong to do that,
Mm. But why is it wrong?
and
to
we
do
should
that?
punish them more.
You know,
We should-
about the thing about does morality make sense if somebody was isolated? I think somebody like virtue ethics would say, well, yeah, it still exists then because you're failing to exemplify the essence of virtue. You know,
But
Terror
yeah.
It's a very-
terror
Yes.
ethics wouldn't do it, though.
love yourself.
I guess, yeah.
Even that
No, I
it's
don't know.
a very unrealistic prospect because to exist you need to be created in some way. You can just poof into existence and then poof out.
Yeah.
So I can't even imagine
Just
how
like my
that would
dad.
work.
So yeah, I guess this would be one thing is that if we look like actual empirical evidence for why people are making their decisions, we'd have to be like, well, it's really due to these other factors, like who their parents were and stuff like that, rather than like them just making a decision on the spot. And so really, we'd have to say like, well, the reason why they turned out to be a bad person doesn't really have to do with them. It's all the other things that they didn't have control over,
Mm.
or is what contributed to that.
And
So the ultimate responsibility lies on, society or, some other factor rather than just the person themselves.
if I could just say one more thing about this, and that's like in the paper that I wrote for paper 2, it was about the competent judges and about Mill, and I think that Mill is trying to he's carrying like English notions of higher order pleasures onto a utilitarianism that would be applied universally. And it's like, man, there are so many other modes of existence which could, if they exist in a utilitarian framework, which I doubt they do, but if they did, there are all sorts of different modes of being which would create higher order pleasures than the ones that you specify. And plus, you're handing the decision making of competent judgment onto somebody else instead of like somebody is relying on somebody else to make the decision of what a higher order pleasure is. Where's your will in that?
I would say with the competent judge thing, he doesn't actually need to experience all the pleasures. He just needs to experience
The
he just needs
pleasures
to
available
experience
to
the
him.
lower ones, some of the lower, if he's comparing two pleasures, one higher, one lower, if he experiences both of those, he's a competent judge onto which one is qualitatively better. That would be the case, but he wouldn't be a competent judge on any other comparisons. So
The thing is,
that
though,
would be I think that's what's required, not that he experienced every pleasure that exists.
if it's at that point, then there can be there can be people who have experienced multiple pleasures and determined that, completely opposite to each other, that, this person's higher order pleasure is this person's lower order. And at that point, it becomes like everybody has their different, is a competent
I
judge.
think that would be like an empirical matter. Like we would have to see if people who experience two pleasures, they always put one in the lower category and the other in the higher
It's not an
category.
empirical matter, though. It's the fact
Well,
that
for the competent judge thing to be, I think that would be an empirical matter because, like you're saying, that people would have different variations. But if we found out that no one actually varied on the matter,
Yeah,
they all had the same opinion about what were lower and higher pleasures.
Yeah.
Then the competent judge thing would work
Oh
out.
yeah, and that's one of my critiques. It's like
You think that people don't have that some.
there's a lot more diversity in the world than saying, and if you have a higher order judge who has experienced these pleasures, and if you want utilitarianism to be like a universal, then you're carrying only one competent judge.
I guess one example of something is you could say like book writing versus having sex, because like having sex is the lower pleasure and book writing is the higher pleasure, and people would probably disagree on that. They'd be like, "Oh no, sex is a higher pleasure," and they might give reasons and stuff. Or I'm thinking even on that case though, you could say like, well, certain types of sex are higher pleasures and other types are lower pleasures. Like, if you hire some prostitute off the street and you just spend like a few minutes and then you leave, you know, that would be a lower pleasure. But if you're like having sex with your girlfriend, you know, you do foreplay and shit like that, and you know, then you have sex, then it's a higher pleasure.
Yeah.
You might still. It might be that people just don't understand what you're talking about when you're talking about the distinction. But if you were clear about what you meant, everyone would have the same views on higher and lower pleasures.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I guess that would be it for the discussion. Do you guys have any final word?
I think the more interesting part was the retribution part, because with deontology, because you know, like we really are kind of just treating them as means to an end if we don't have punishment as a reason for criminalizing them. I wonder if there's some sort of other deontology theories that could get away with that, but you know, that seems somewhat sensible. Like, we're just like, well, we want you to be this way, and so we're gonna, you know, make you this way. Seems like you're just kind of, you know, denying that person's agency.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was an interesting point as well.
I'm just going to say the reason why I'm here today is because I am interested in ethics. I discriminated between doing other things and doing this thing. I decided to do this. I don't know why, but the fact is I did and I do. And I guess we can say that's care, that's love, or that's interest. Whatever that is, it's what I choose, and I think that's why ethics is important for me.
All right. But yeah, I just wanted to say about ethics is I find it very interesting, although I do think it is a bit suffocating at times. I do think it's very interesting, and I'm glad that I did this podcast with you guys. And yeah, that should be it. Thanks for listening to the 69th episode of the Philosophy Bros, and we'll catch you next time.
See you later.
See ya.